Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. I am Sharon Green Middleton, Vice President of the City Council, representative for the 6th Council District, and chairperson for the Economic and Community Development Committee. This afternoon, the committee will hear Bill number 21-0113. It's a continuation of a bill that we are still working through, that we have been putting in recess, but we're back on again for another day with this bill. In attendance, we have members of the committee, Councilman John Bullock of the 9th District.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilman Conway of the 4th District is with us today. He's just stepped away for a few minutes. Councilman Ryan Dorsey has an excused absence. Councilman Antonio Glover has an excused absence. Councilwoman Odette Ramos is on as a panelist. And Councilman Robert Stokes of the 12th District is here.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And from the Council President's Office, we have Lucy Font, Staff Assistant for Legislative Affairs. Thank you. And we also have the Director of Legislative Affairs as a panelist on, Nikki Thompson. From the Office of the Mayor, we have Nina Thimulis.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And also we have Aaron DeGraffenreid, General Counsel from the President's Office. And we also have Sophia G. with the Mayor's Office as well of Governmental Relations. And just to go over again, we're beginning with Bill number 21-0113, zoning code modifications for the purpose of making needed changes to certain provisions that during the course of actively operating under the new zoning code were discovered to be functionally impractical or otherwise in need of modification to abate previously unanticipated consequences, and generally relating to the zoning and land use laws of the City of Baltimore. This bill was sponsored by the Council President for the Administration for the Department of Planning, and this bill was introduced on August 16th, 2021. A public hearing was held on March 1st, 2021, and that hearing was recessed. Work sessions were held on May 10th, 2022, and May 24th, 2022. And as a reminder, public testimony was taken at the public hearing. The committee will not take public testimony again at today's work session. And before we begin, do committee members have any comments or questions? Hearing none, the committee will resume discussions with the bill. Today, we will begin with Title 15, and we'll try to complete discussions up to Title 18. If possible, we will begin discussions on the zoning tables. Tamara Woods, we would like you to begin, and I'd like you to, since we're starting right at the top with Title 15, the site development standards, measurements, and methodologies, if you could just, kind of explain what that is and go over and kind of take it from there.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Tamara Woods with the Department of Planning. And just Title 15 is kind of how you do the math of measuring certain things. So in this case, we have building height. Can you hear me okay with the mask?
Yes, but you can remove your mask when you're speaking if you like it. That
Might
does help
better.
to make it a little more clearer. Thank you, Tamara.
Okay, and so it's generally the measurement methodologies, how you're measuring different building heights, and this is in what things can be excluded from the measurement methodology. So there's some permitted encroachments, some things like chimneys that are not included. So those are the types of things that are in Title 15. It's really I don't want to say the super practical as if the whole code isn't practical, but that's probably, a piece that's a little bit more technical on the how-to. It gives the guidance for people that are seeking to use the code. So with that, we'll just start walking through 15301. So this is for the measurement of building height, and this particular one, the amendment actually takes place on page 24 on line 12, it starts on line 11 and continues to line 12, where we're seeking to remove the ground between that wall and the curb and replace it with ground adjoining that wall. So the sentence would read, if the front wall of the building is not within 30 feet of the curb from the average elevation of the ground adjoining that wall. So basically, what this particular amendment is seeking to do is to change how you measure building height for buildings that are 30 feet or more from the curb. And the reason we're proposing this particular amendment is because some building sites have high topography changes that really are impacted once you move a little bit more from the curb. So sometimes, the site may be lower, or the site might be actually higher as you move towards the center, or however the site may be. So this, for us, is actually allowing developers to get a bit more of a true reading of that particular building height versus if you were measuring from the curb itself. And I don't have the picture, like we have an actual graphic for it that shows it. But essentially, if this is the curb, and then the more you go in, say the site went up and your building is on the high side of the site, you would be measuring from closer to the high side of the site versus the curb, which is lower. So it's a truer elevation.
Okay, and just for the committee to reiterate that this particular piece helps to mitigate the height of new structure being built on a slope, and Tamara just explained why there is a change and to what currently exists. Are there any questions on this piece from the committee? And hearing none, go ahead, Tamara.
Okay, so we're moving to 15405. So this particular amendment takes place in line 24, and I'll just say line 25 is just a renumbering. But line 24 is seeking to change the language primary use to principal use. Principal use is the word that we actually use in the zoning code. So it really is just a word change. So that's all that particular amendment is.
Okay, that's a word change. Any questions? Hearing none, proceed.
Okay, so we're at 15504 Carriage House. So this particular section already exists in the zoning code, so we are definitely seeking to modify it. So currently, just starting on line 4 on page 25 of the bill, where we're seeking to remove subdivided and replace it, with converted a single-family detached dwelling. And I'll kind of walk through that a little bit, and then we would be seeking to remove lines 6 and 7. The new lot area meets the minimum lot yard requirements, and then in line 8, the building contains at least currently 1750, or we're seeking to lower that to 750 square feet gross floor area. And then we would seek to change all other requirements of the code are met. So, or variance if obtained, we're seeking to remove that, so you would not need a variance. And then on line 11, that's a renumbering. So basically what this entire section is, like I said, it exists in the zoning code. And the way it's written now is you must subdivide the carriage house off, which makes no sense. Often the carriage house is behind the main house, so we don't create flag lots. We're not trying to create flag lots, but also for giving some latitude and affordability, we believe that you should just be able to do this by right if it is an existing carriage house. This is not applying to new builds or anything like that. So that's the gist of the language. We do believe that the 750 square feet of gross floor area is more in keeping with the size of what a carriage house might actually be in the city. The 1750 is really rather large as well, and you still have to meet all code requirements, and you would still need the one parking space. So that's really the gist of that first section in A. Did we want to walk through A, or any questions before I move to B?
So, first a note that I know that Councilmember Dorsey and Councilmember Ramos have amendments in to basically delete the language line 8 to 11, and we do have Councilwoman Ramos on as a panelist. If I don't know if she'd like to comment on that, but we are, remember, not going to vote on these. We're going to do all the amendments together. But Councilwoman Ramos, are you there? Did you want to make a comment at this time about your amendment for that piece?
Hi, Madam. Hi, Madam Chair, and hi, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to participate, even though I can't be there in person. I believe that my amendment, which was in the materials that everybody got online, takes the parking requirement out for carriage houses. So instead of half a space or a space, you would not have to have a parking space for the carriage house.
Okay. Thank you. So I just wanted the committee to know that that was there for you to consider when we work on all of the amendments.
And Councilman Dorsey's is a little beyond that as well.
Right.
So,
and he is absent today. But if you, since you know about it, did you want to just
sure.
say something? Okay.
Sure, I can read through it. So where we're seeking to reduce from 1750 square feet of gross floor area to 750, he's seeking to amend our amendment to go from 750 gross square feet to 350. And like Councilwoman Ramos, he would like to remove the parking requirement. And we would be okay with both of those.
Okay. So are there any comments at this point from the committee members on these amendments? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman Ramos, as well. And now we'll go ahead and move on to Title 16.
So we still have one more in B.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem. So this one is a new B that we're seeking to add to carriage houses. So in addition, if an existing carriage house is converted into a dwelling unit, it cannot be enlarged by any alteration that would increase the building height or footprint by more than 20%. So we do feel that having this latitude is necessary. If you're rehabbing your carriage house, there may be a need to either add some height or do some kind of construction that may increase the size, but we do believe that that needs to be limited, severely limited. So we're saying by no more than 20%.
Okay, any questions? Hearing none, go ahead.
Okay, so Title 16, let's see, so we're at 16.205 and the provision of additional spaces and parking maximums. So this particular amendment it's just a removal of a comma in line 25, and in line 26, we want to add the words "or no parking is required." So basically, this particular section of the zoning code limits the amount of overage that you can do to your parking. So you can only do 2 times the amount of your parking, except for in detached and semi-detached dwelling units, which there is no maximum or no parking is already required. So that's just really clarifying that particular statement.
Any questions on 205? Hearing none, move on, please.
Okay, so we're on page 26, site plan review requirements 16.301. So this particular set of amendments starts in line 15, And this one, I'll just kind of read through it. So these are exclusions. Construction, alteration, or addition does not include maintenance activities such as replacement, existing landscaping, repair of curbing, repair, sealing, restriping. We're seeking to add the language on line 15 with no design or layout changes. So basically, if you're restriping, you cannot use that as an excuse to change the layout of your parking lot. So we're adding this clarifying language.
Okay.
And moving on to 16402, this particular one is on line 22, where we're seeking to add 22 and 23. We're seeking to add a new number 2, as reviewed by the Site Plan Review Committee and approved by the Director of Planning. What this does is basically giving the Site Plan Review Committee some latitude in how you dimension the parking spaces. This is necessary when developers are seeking to add compact spaces. So it gives the committee that latitude that's necessary in, maybe crafting a more efficient layout or something like that. So we run into that all the time. So this gives that latitude.
Okay.
And the same rationale for 16403, where we're seeking in lines 29 and 30 to add the same language, but this one pertains to one-way traffic aisles. So again, it's about giving that latitude for design of parking.
Okay.
And 16601, so let's see where we're starting here in line 5. And again, in line 7, so this is something that's pretty unique in the code. So square footage exemption for a C2. Right now, we allow for the first 2,500 square feet of gross floor area for those commercial uses in C2 to not have to require parking. We're seeking to bump that up to 3,000. And that just gives a little bit more breathing room for our small businesses that may not be able to provide parking on site. So it's just bumping it up another 500 square feet. The language is repeated, the amendment language in line 7. And number 2, what this does is basically it's saying that you're not eligible for this exemption if you're a multi-tenant space. And so we know that often with multi-tenant configurations, their parking load is a little bit more, so you don't get this special treatment if you have more than one tenant. And let's see, let me open the next section. Okay, so 16601F. This particular one deals with structures over 50 years old and their parking requirement. And this would pertain to conversions. Right now, what we're looking to do in line 17 through 19 is remove the section, however, any conversion of row house dwellings existed before June 5th, 2017 must provide additional parking spaces. So we want to remove that. So if you have a conversion, then you're not actually able to manufacture land out of nothing. We're not going to make you provide a parking space because most of the bills that come through will request a variance anyway. So that's the first piece of it. Number 2, exceptions. I don't want to really read through this because we actually have an amendment in our staff report that we put forward. I'd rather read through what we're actually going to propose.
Okay.
So let me find that. Okay. So this is parking exemption for historic structures. So 16601F. We are proposing to delete the entirety of number 2 that you see in your bill, which is deletion of lines 20 through 25, and replace it with a new section that's number 2, and it's called permitting. And the first, number 1, would read, if an exemption is granted by the Director of Planning, a parking variance is not required and evidence of an approved exemption must be submitted with permit application. So that's the first one. And then a number 2, If the exemption is denied by the Director of Planning, a variance may be requested and approved by the Board of Municipal and Zoning Appeals. And the reason for this particular departure from the language we have in the bill, as we were preparing for Planning Commission, we received just tons of questions on what exactly does this even mean. And so once you start getting those types of questions, obviously the language is unclear. The other thing that we learned through those conversations is some people were kind of in the know, and they knew you could just go request a variance even if you were denied, and others were not. You know, if you didn't know, you didn't ask. And so what we wanted to do with this language is make the process very clear. And so that's the reason why we're seeking to remove this number 2 and replace it with a very clear process.
Okay.
Let's see.
One second.
Okay.
So as you stated, this is just to make the process a little more clear.
So on number 2, yes. And the part 17 through line 17 through 19 is just deleting the requirement that conversions have to require, well, that they require the parking space. So it doesn't delete that you still have to request the exemption. So you still have to get permission for it.
Right.
It's just not that you have to keep going through all of these hoops to do it. If your property doesn't yield the ability to put a parking space, then,
Right.
you know, then we most likely would grant it, but we have that latitude to evaluate it.
Okay. Any questions on this piece at this point? Hearing none?
Okay, so we're on G, so that's still on page 27. And I'll read through this. Reductions, affordable housing. No more than one parking space need be provided for every 2 dwelling units in dwellings that are erected or rehabilitated, subject to a restriction that units be leased to residents with incomes at or below 60% of AMI, with that restriction being for a term of not less than 15 years from the date of the issuance of a use permit and recorded in the land records of Baltimore City. The Housing Commissioner must verify by letter to the Planning Director and the Zoning Administrator the recordation term and tenor of the restriction. And I'll go to page 28 because these are all together, so kind of a package. And then on the top of page 28, a new H, reduction small dwellings, no more than 0.5 parking spaces need be provided for every dwelling unit that is 500 square feet or smaller. And then a new I, reduction housing for elderly. For units designed for occupancy by the elderly in a government-assisted private or public housing dwelling, no more than 1 space need be provided for every 4 units. So this entire new section is replacing what's below it on page 28. So if you look at 16602, required off-street parking, and you see all the deletions, the in general, the reductions of affordable housing, the reductions of small dwelling units, and the reductions of housing of the elderly, all of that is being deleted and replaced with what I just read. Where there is a difference, and it's a notable difference, is in I, when you look at reductions for housing for the elderly. The existing language separates R5 and R6. So in R5, you are 1 parking space for every 2 units. For R7 through R10, you're 1 for every 4. The new language actually is 1 for every 4, R5 through R10. So that's a little bit of a switch, but it really is just, you know, kind of consolidating these sections and replacing them.
Do you have data that backs up this change?
We don't.
Come up with this?
This is a section I'm probably least familiar with the parking counts. But what I will say is, and I'll just be very frank and very honest, that I think as a city, we've been moving for fewer or less parking requirements.
Yes.
So in this case, it doesn't mean that you can't provide more. except for the amendment that we just did where you can't go more than 2 times more, but I don't know why you would really want to build more than 2 times more. What we did here, and this was, just kind of anecdotal from some residents when we were speaking about this, is they felt that they don't like to be kind of, I guess generalized that, maybe public housing doesn't have people that don't have cars, and that's not the intent. It really is about just the reduction in the requirement itself. So you don't have to build it. It's not saying that you can't build it.
And this is...
Madam Chair.
1 second. And so, just to be clear, this is just about housing, not facilities that basically cater to the elderly and so on. And I bring that up because we did have a bill that was heard in this committee of the League of the Blind, that is a facility that deals with disabled and a lot of seniors. And there was conversation, about the allowance of that parking, which at the end was definitely needed. But so this is strictly with housing.
So this is with housing. Now, where I would seek to maybe get clarification from the law department in the nuance of language is where it says designed for occupancy by the elderly in a government-assisted private. So that's the part that we would, to answer your question, what the latitude of that language actually encompasses.
Okay, and then we'll hear from Councilman Conway and then Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Just a thought.
Okay.
I appreciated your question about the logic behind the numbers. I'm no parking expert. We have one in the room, but just thinking about this over the long term, I think this is kind of a chicken or the egg kind of problem in that we will need less parking when we have better transportation options and people don't need to rely on vehicles as much. And so I am uncomfortable in both ways because I don't think that our transportation system is sufficient at the moment. That's a pretty big lift, but I do know that parking is in many ways a waste of valuable space. So I just want to kind of get that on the record. I appreciate what you guys are doing. I think it is the right direction to move in. I am sensitive to the fact that still we essentially are relying on vehicles to get people to and from work every day. And until we resolve our transportation problem, we're going to find ourselves in a pretty significant pickle when it comes to people finding.
So we'll have to have discussion whether we want to leave it alone until that some of those changes happen. Is that what you're?
I haven't quite made my mind up on that yet. Okay. I do though. I know that is a pretty important consideration.
Is the law department on? I mean, Jeff. Is Jeff on? Jeff, would you like to comment?
I am on.
Hello?
Madam Chair, yes, I'm on.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Madam Chair, can you hear me?
Yes. Did you want to make a comment on this section?
Yes, I am covering for Hillary here, and I'm taking notes, and certainly the law department intends to have
okay.
A sufficient review of all of these before final vote on the amendments.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
And then while we're at it, does transportation just want to make a general comment about this little piece while we're discussing it?
Sure. I think the having less parking requirements is aligned with our complete streets efforts, and there's a number of things to consider. I know that as developers are building new buildings or new residential units, parking is an expensive cost associated with that. So when we talk about housing affordability, and encouraging developers to build more housing to address the nation's housing shortage and our shortage here in the city. Making it more affordable, part of that is kind of taking certain elements out, and parking definitely adds an expense. More broadly, I would say the election last week is going to have major impact for transportation across the state, also the city, and for the city council, just something to flag for everyone here, we're currently engaging the Maryland Department of Transportation to confirm the annual CTP Roadshow. We're working on finalizing our talking points with the mayor's office. So we're really kind of focusing on what is the future for our transportation priorities for Baltimore City. What is the future with the potential change of, with the pending change of guard at Indianapolis. So there's a lot moving, but we're pretty encouraged the way things are looking right now.
Oh, thank you. Did you have a response or another comment, Councilman?
No, I'll be brief. I just, I don't know exactly where I lie on how to approach it in the meantime. I certainly appreciate the effort. I think it is the right direction to move in. What we need by way of transportation infrastructure is really robust, and I think, Liam, your point is probably right. So yeah, I'll continue thinking on the matter in the meantime, and I think. I just remembered this. One of the major considerations that we have to keep in mind although reducing the parking for developers does help reduce the costs of those buildings, that's great. We want to see that. That's the right direction to move in. Developers that don't make enough parking in a given neighborhood then create a burden on folks who've lived there for parking. And how we balance that is really important. So I don't want us to forget that while we're trying to make those accommodations. So still, this transportation problem is overwhelmingly going to be the kind of nut to crack. But yeah, I think we're moving in the right direction. It's just how to do so with the sensitivity.
And I think too, this is such a nuanced thing when you're coming up with what is the actual parking requirement for a development. It's not always cut and dry. So even if you're taking this particular, clause with housing for the elderly, and I have no idea, but, maybe there's some other kind of units in there. Maybe it's part of a larger complex and they're sharing parking. Maybe, there are all these things that are used in coming up with the requirement, but this is really just, I think, changing the baseline. So as you're kind of thinking through the direction that you would want to go, just understand this is the baseline. So even if you didn't change it and a developer cannot, for whatever reason provide it, they're going to go to BMZA and ask for relief. So it's, where do you want the relief? Do you just want it to be by right, or do you want to send them to BMZA? So that's really where it comes from. And the other thing that we do see is, again, with this just being the base, if, cost was no object, then it's going to be completely market driven if they have the space. So there are all these kind of nuances that are included. So it's just, where do you want to set the base, that foundation?
Good point. A good word,
Madam Vice
baseline.
President.
Yes, go ahead, Councilman.
And I think it is worth noting that the exemption process that we just outlined in the earlier part of the bill may help us a little bit here if the planning director can use some discretion in providing exemptions for these parking pieces. But yes, I think to your point, by right or by request, certainly by right helps grease the skids significantly, and folks can plan accordingly as opposed to asking for permission and maybe or maybe not getting it. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
This helps to keep that conversation going as we move forward, especially with the problems with transportation and the updates that we have to continue to improve in this city. And I don't want to leave Councilman Ramos hanging. Are you there?
Hi, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I had an amendment to this. When I saw this, I was very distraught that housing for the elderly and housing for affordable housing would be singled out. So my amendment, which by the way, I just realized is incorrect, I have to get it changed, would be to eliminate the page 27, line 26, letter G, all the way to letter H and letter I, and just do a something for all multifamily buildings, whether it's for-profit, I meant for, market rate or, affordable. It doesn't make sense to single them out. So our policy should be about all multifamily. Now, my initial policy recommendation in my amendments was to reduce it to half a space per unit up to the first 4 units. Out of the first 4 units. But I'm willing to negotiate on that given the conversation that the committee just had. But I think we should look at them as not just singling out affordable housing and all of that, but it should be all multifamily buildings. So the amendment, it doesn't say that right now, but I'll get it changed, would be to remove, housing for the elderly, affordable, et cetera, and just do one section on all multifamily buildings. And then we can discuss what that kind of looks like, because I do see that there's an issue with cost. Honestly, in looking at what we're hoping to do with inclusionary housing, that could be one of the incentives is to lower parking minimums, but we haven't gotten there yet. So just sort of in general, that's where I was headed with that amendment. And I just wanted to let the committee know.
Okay. So we'll hold on to that amendment. It's especially after the discussion we just had, considering that the amendment that Tamara had spoke of was basically a baseline to kind of start the conversation, along with the comments from the Department of Transportation. And we'll hear further down from Jeff as well. But your amendment is well taken for further discussion as we move along. And we all have a copy of that as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other comments from committee so we can move on to the next? Hearing none, Tamara, you're on.
Okay, so we're now on page 29, and we'll start with 16701, design standards for all bicycle parking. So in number 1, we're saying except as provided in paragraph 2, and we'll get to that, of this subsection, required bicycle spaces must be at least 2 feet wide by 6 feet, and with a minimum overhead vertical clearance of 7 feet 6 inches. And then the rest of that we would delete, except for approved bike lockers and other enclosures which may be shorter in height. And so then we come to line 11, number 2, exceptions. Bicycle spaces that are ground mounted may be 1.5 by 6 feet long. So we're actually proposing to delete this, and we have a different amendment that we would like to put in its place. Let's see. So looking at, let me make sure I get the right one. Okay. So, no, I think that's the one we're just proposing to delete it. So this attempt was to align to the DOT right-of-way standard, but the interior bike room conditions are such that the smaller space size may not be practical and can't account for a proper alternate direction that you would sometimes alternate. So in order to pull one out, you might need a little bit wider space. So we are actually proposing to delete that particular one. And let me make sure I'm getting Okay, so number 2, we would keep approved bike lockers and other enclosures may be shorter than the dimensions described in paragraph 1 of this subsection. So that's the first one. The second one, we're going to I on floor racks. We're looking at I2 is where we're actually proposing to make the changes. So right now, the bill says wall and ceiling rack designs are subject to the approval of Director of Planning as part of the site plan review. And this is the language that we were proposing. However, in no case may no more than 80% of the required bicycle parking spaces be provided as wall or ceiling racks. So this particular piece, we had a lot of discussion leading up to Planning Commission with Bike More and other interested parties. So we really were trying to kind of think of what are really the practical ramifications of this particular thing? How do we work with the desires of the community and advocacy organizations, plus the reality of how we know things get built? So what we came up with in our amendment is to delete the proposed amendment, however, no case more than in the ceiling racks, and replace it with where it starts of site plan review as follows, and then a new I, in no case of new construction of a building may more than 50% of the required bicycle parking spaces be provided as wall or ceiling racks. And then number 2, in no case of building rehabilitation or adaptive reuse of a building may no more than 75% of the required bicycle parking spaces be provided as wall or ceiling racks. So this particular proposed modification makes it clear that the proportion of ground-mounted bike racks must be provided, but we understand that there may be some space limitations when you're doing rehab or retrofit projects. They can't make sometimes the buildings bigger, but when you're doing new construction, you're doing new construction. So therefore, you should be able to be better able to provide more of the ground mounted racks. So that's what we're proposing for this particular one.
I guess just a question for transportation. In the complete streets, is there a section on bike racks, and is this work hand in hand with the amendment that they're trying to put in?
So I'm not sure if there's sections specific to bike racks with complete streets, but I do know as we prepared our bill report for this legislation, we included our lead bike planner, Matthew Hendrickson, and our bill report does reference the updates to the required bike racks for certain developments and buildings, and we are in support of the new language.
Okay, any questions from the committee? 1 second, please. Okay, you want to go ahead and... Councilman Stokes has a question.
I just have a question. We know when bike lanes were put in, there was a lot of pushback from the community because some communities they talked to, some they didn't. Sometimes people wake up, they couldn't park, especially I've seen this in front of their door because for some reason overnight a bicycle lane showed up. So we talking about some more bicycle issues. Are we presenting this to the community too? Because that was the pushback from before. And we back here again making decisions in here, and there's no community input on what's going on. And again, it's going to show up in communities that don't really, I guess, involved with this whole bicycle, bike lane, bike this and bike up and down the street, and it's just like it's repeating itself again on how they installed the bike lanes from the beginning.
So Tamara, did you want to just maybe comment?
Sure, just really quickly.
In refreshing the process of really this whole thing and how community was involved.
Sure, and then I'm going to turn it over to Liam because I think there's a distinction that needs to be made. This is the zoning code that pertains to the private parcels. The only case where and this is for the bike parking and bike racks. And so the only cases where you might have it is the short-term bike parking that may actually show up on the right-of-way. It doesn't get at the design of, the bike lanes or the placement of the bike lanes, but where we begin to interact is if we know there are planned bike lanes, then we'll work with the developer to make sure the bike parking works for, where the bike lanes would show up. So this is only one piece that pertains to the actual parcels, and I can turn it over to Liam to talk more about the lanes themselves.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, and I, it's definitely important to have that clarity. So thank you so much. And I think sometimes we get feedback, well, I don't see many bikes in the bike facilities. And well, part of this exercise today is part of that. We're trying to make it encourage people, make it easier for people to bike around the city. And I think sometimes what gets lost is why this is so important. This is the hottest year. Last year was the previous hottest year. The previous year was the hottest year. So if we're serious about fighting things like climate change and improving air quality and that type of stuff, we do have to embrace some alternative modes of transportation. But I do value your comments, Councilman Stokes. We are striving at DOT to do a much better job as far as community outreach, community engagement when it comes to our bike facilities, the dedicated bike, the protected bike lanes, our bike boulevards. And there are a number of them that are actively being planned right now. We do get interesting feedback. It can be contentious. You do oftentimes get people who are very, they're very passionate about this issue, either in support or in opposition. And what I've asked our bike team and our community engagement team is, let's listen to what people are saying. And if there's any room for compromise, let's try and find that. Something that works for the community, that keeps the community happy, something that's safe for our bike riders. So it's really something that it's a delicate balance. And each project we're taking much more seriously.
And a lot of the contention is in our black and brown impoverished neighborhoods that don't ride bikes as much, their money is, and surviving every day is at the top of their list. So it's, those are areas where a lot of the pushback is coming from. So we must continue to have the conversations. Councilman Stokes' comment?
Thank you for that, Liam. But Bike More, are they doing any more outreach in terms of, I guess, adding people more to Bike More to the board? Because there's a disconnect between what we're talking about. There's a disconnect when they put the bike lanes in. I haven't seen, I guess, Bike More or the DOT do no outreach in black and brown communities to see if they want to be interested in sitting in the same room with the other folks who are making the decisions about the bike lane, the racks. I've not seen that from the city, and I heard people keep complaining about they don't know them about this. Mm-hmm. So is the city now doing an outreach to the community so they can be in the same room so we don't keep having these hearings and all these bike lanes and racks been installed and just people find out the next day or 2 days or 3 days later? I think there should be more outreach from the city in terms of bringing those other communities together that's not involved in the room where the decisions are made.
Yeah, and I do think there's always room for improvement. And I can say that even though there's a lot of room for improvement right now in July 2022, I can say when I first joined DOT in April 2019, we didn't even have a bike planner. So we've hired a lead bike planner. In addition to that, we've hired an additional bike planner under our lead bike planner. And then we also have consultants that we work with to help with our outreach in addition to our stakeholder engagement team. And Councilman, if there's any specific corridors where you're seeing this come up, I really would like to know about it so I can plug our team in there so we can really listen. That's really the important thing. Like, our neighbors and residents have been living in these neighborhoods for decades. I'm just going to say this because I love this quote. The thing people hate more than change is the way things are. And I'm stealing that from Julie Day from DPW. So the bottom line, though, is when there is a contentious kind of community feedback, we want to be looped in. I want to be looped in. It's our job at DOT to take that feedback and work with the community to have a plan, establish a plan that everyone can be happy with.
And I just want to say, too, that I think remember, we have been through a number of mayors in a short period of time with different ideas, and I remember former Catherine Mayor Pugh basically got rid of a number of bike lanes or did some changes that sided with the community. I have one neighborhood that it affected, and who got the blame for it? The council person. So, there's conversations about, loss of revenue, and it's really a contentious subject that I know council members take to heart because we wholeheartedly represent the majority of what our community asks are for. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration as well.
Absolutely. And the thing, as we talk about, and we've said this in the budget hearing with the anticipated increase with the highway user revenue, one of the things we've had internal conversations, like how are we looking to use this extra money to invest in our infrastructure? One of the things I've asked our team to consider is we need to definitely focus a little bit more on resurfacing, because I think part of the opposition that we're getting is that people see these special projects where it looks like money is being diverted away from resurfacing. And I think if we all look at the roads around the city today, they're not in the best condition. So I think if we do them in tandem, we invest in our road infrastructure, we resurface our roads, and simultaneously build out our bicycle network, I think that's going to help us because the status quo right now, you kind of have not the best bike facilities and you have not the best roads, and nobody's happy. So it's a conversation we're actively having.
Councilman Stokes?
Real quick, Liam, we're not blaming this all on you. You just happen to be here to get all the blame. But I just want to use Monument and Central. That was a problem that happened there. We are now putting $22 million in to redo Chick Webb Rec Center. So across the street from there, where people used to live at on Monument Central, is now a bike lane. So now the bike lane there, redoing Chick Webb. Now we're talking about another parking problem. My suggestion to DOT is I can bring my community leaders together and have a conversation with the DOT Bike More to have a more robust conversation with the community. So whatever you're doing in terms of what we're talking about here, at least they have the information in front of them and they can give you more input instead of Bike More is fine, but a lot of people in the community are not going to go there. If we bring all our community leaders together and they know exactly what's going on, then you can get that feedback from them when you're presenting what you're presenting now. So I like to work with DOT on bringing it together, that kind of conversation.
So really, at the end of the day, is the community ready for bike lanes? Because one last thing, many years ago, people laughed at Mayor Smoke about weak legislation, and so at the end of the day, it's best to let the data speak. Mm-hmm. So
I have a point on that, which is great. Our bike team has procured bike counters. And I've actually seen them in place on the Maryland Avenue cycle track, so we can actually track ridership. The other cool thing is this: with the dockless scooter program, we already are tracking ridership, and during peak season, you're seeing over 10,000 rides per day. When the weather's good, on those dockless scooters, and those are legally under state law considered bikes. So we are moving in that direction, but I absolutely hear how important it is that the concerns of the community are listened to, taken into account, factored into our final designs. And Councilman, I feel like we've had many meetings over the past several years, and whenever a council member or a community wants us to come to their community or their block to talk about a specific issue, we will be there. We will be there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good dialogue. We need to continue having conversations like this when we can. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Okay, you're on, Tamara.
Okay, so we're at the top of page 30, and we're in the same section on M. So we are proposing to add in a new M, standard design. Bicycle parking spaces must be designed in accordance with table 16701, bicycle parking dimensions. We do have an amendment for that. The actual table was not created prior to introduction of the bill. So what you'll see is we are definitely seeking to add that table in. And I believe, we'll have to double check this, but even this amended table, I think, has a mistake in it that we are actually going to have amended, like a revised version of this table. I think one of the dimensions is incorrect, and the advice that we received from the law department is that we would have to have the revised table amended in for that correction.
Okay.
And moving on.
Work on that for the...
I think I sent it, or I may have asked. I have to go back and look at my emails and see if I asked another council person to do it. I have to go back and check.
Okay. You have a question? Go ahead. Councilman Stokes.
Just a question. Who are making the decision on where these bike racks are going to be located?
So
is that still going to have some community input like they do the charging?
On where?
The bike, yeah.
So so the ones that are coming, I guess, from DOT, that would be part of, I guess, the process that would go with the bike lanes. But typically what we're working with from this code perspective are with the private developers. And so it's kind of an iterative process. It's like any other development process. If they're speaking to the community and the community has issues with where they're proposing them, then they would speak and we would hear from that perspective. But a lot of times for the exterior short-term bike racks, it's a matter of space as well. Like how much room do they even have to put the bike rack? So we often will work with them during the design phase. So if there is not a lot of room and they need to put them on the right of way, then it's a matter of, is there still clearance, the ADA clearance for passage. In some cases for the exterior bike racks, we may actually work with a developer and say, are you creating a patio somewhere and maybe on your own land? And if so, then maybe some of the bike racks will go there. So it's not a cut and dry.
So my question then, if the developers are making the decision, where do that go from there? Go over to DOT? I mean, I'm only saying that because even the the charging dockets for electrical cars, in my community, they put it somewhere where it was dark. And the community kept going back and forth because they never told the community from the beginning, giving them a suggestion of where they could go. They found out it was too dark, so that kind of the communication wasn't good. So I'm saying if the developer is going to put it where it is, are there still going to be a communication between the community and the developer, or is it the developer now talk to DOT, and DOT
it's-
talk to the community?
It's kind of all of it. So it really, with our development processes, we always tell developers to talk with the community and share their plans with the community. So that part doesn't change. Where when it comes to private development, where DOT automatically gets involved, this is where our site plan review committee comes in, because we have several members of DOT that sit on that committee, and they would give input in that, in that body. So it just depends on the comments that we get. But that's only for the private development. That does not, if DOT is saying, oh, we want to put some citywide, racks, that would be under Liam's shop.
Real quick, I just want to make sure we don't make the same mistake we made with bike lanes. Whatever agreement, the private developer, the DOT, that the community don't be missed out in the whole process, that's all.
No, we definitely will make sure. And, I don't know, Liam, if you wanted to add anything else or.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think anything in the building is going to be, it has to adhere to the zoning code, and then anything outside on the public right-of-way, that'll be addressed during site plan review. And then additionally, we have businesses, you can request a bike rack via 311, and then I know Louis from BDC, they're also working with businesses that want them as well. So it's like a combination of, I think the zoning code's more like, here's the requirement based on your building and how many units there are, how many square feet it is. But then, any business, like sometimes we get schools, sometimes we get, bars, sometimes we get offices that put in a 311 request to put a bike rack in. So, a lot of it's by request right now.
Louis from BDC, do you want
Sure,
to add a
Louis.
comment?
Sure, I'm Louise Cardona, Director of Neighborhood Development, BDC. And to answer your specific question, we do partner with DOT when it comes to identifying specifically independent businesses that desire bike rack parking, and there is a process that DOT directs. And when it comes to getting approvals and so forth, we work with business owners that wish to add bike parking through the municipal DOT process, and it's always for the same reason. It's for the benefit of their customers and their employees, specifically the latter that have lack of access to a car is usually the most frequent reason that's cited among small businesses. So we identify those businesses at BDC and work with our partners at DOT, and to have a particular bike rack installed in front of a business, and I want to be very clear, we'd have no comment or jurisdiction on what happens in residential areas. Just for businesses, it requires both the approval of the business owner and the property owner in order to be cited. And then when it is installed, that goes to the jurisdiction of DOT and their engineers to make sure it doesn't interfere with ADA, trees, any utilities underneath, and so forth.
So I know that, just another thought with that, I know that Paul Taylor's shop, I can't think of the title of the agency, they have a goal, and they're working with creating a number of Main Street areas. Has a partnership developed with either BDC or transportation with that? Because I know that that's, some of us have new Main Street areas that are going to be starting. Specifically, one is on Park Heights Avenue.
I'm going to let BDC go first, and then I can add.
Sure, and if you're referring to the Baltimore Main Street's office that's under Paul's shop, we do work specifically with each Main Street manager to identify businesses in those Main Street districts, the existing ones, and that one that you referenced as well, to find businesses that wish to have parking. Now, to be fair, if a business does not wish to have a bike rack installed in front of it, it will not get installed. As I mentioned earlier, it requires business owner approval and property owner approval to be put in front of the public right-of-way, and then making sure that it doesn't conflict with any of the other conditions that Tamara and Liam talked about.
Okay. Liam?
So yeah, the other thing that I think is also relevant to this conversation, and I mentioned dockless scooters earlier today. Every time someone uses a dockless scooter, there's a fee for use. In addition to the private fee for use, there's actually a 10-cent activation fee. That 10 cents goes to the city. And it actually makes its way back to our transit bureau. And what we've been doing in a number of the Main Street areas and also around transit stops are installing these corrals. They're called like bike or scooter corrals. And sometimes early on in the scooter program, we were getting complaints like, hey, the scooter's just in the middle of the sidewalk, or it's laying in the road. So these corrals are designed to encourage people to park the scooters, park the bikes in an organized manner so that there aren't any ADA conflicts. And I have seen them in numerous Main Street areas, and I know they're also at, again, like metro stops, areas where we're seeing high ridership, and also within our equity zone. We have an equity zone map that our dockless scooter coordinator has developed with our various stakeholders.
So these performance measures and connections didn't exist before, so I'm glad to see that there's progress in that piece. And last words on this subject?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I'd only say that even if it's on private business, can you at least find out what community it impacts, so at least the community know that bike rack, whether it's on private property or not. Because if you don't do that, you still got to break down and communicate. And I know it might be on somebody's private property, but just a suggestion, if you talk to whoever council person district is in, maybe they can find out what particular community association, at least they know that it's going to be the bike rack installed on that private property, that's all. Because if we're going to talk about communicating on the bike lanes and don't communicate on the bike racks just because they're on private property, we go back to the same thing again. It's the breakdown of communication. So it's just a suggestion from DOT or BDC.
I would like to have, and we can talk offline, but I would like to have our team talk with you, because there's certain details I'm probably missing today that isn't doing this conversation justice, but I would like you to get fully briefed so we can touch base offline.
Okay, just a quick 2-minute break. I think we're finished with 16, or are we finished?
Not quite.
Okay, when we finish with 16, we'll just take a quick 3-minute break, and then we'll finish up with 17, and then we'll be finished for today anyway.
Okay.
Go ahead, we'll finish up with 16.
Okay, so we're still on page 30, 16704, long-term bicycle parking standards. And this particular amendment was not included in the bill. The way it's written on lines 23 through 26 is that we're seeking to delete that entire section. But when we went back and had conversations and revisited, and I believe one of my colleagues had a conversation with Councilman Dorsey about this at the time, and it deals with kind of where you can place the long-term bike parking, which is within a view of an attendant or a security guard, monitored by a security camera, and that's visible from an employee work area. And originally we were like, oh gosh, this isn't really needed. But when we began to talk about it and really think through, this really might be needed for stadiums and other places that actually provide more bike parking than could possibly be accommodated in a bike room or something like that. So what we did is we went back and we said, instead of deleting lines, well, starting on line 23 through 26, we would actually move the current 3 through 5, Roman numeral 3 through Roman numeral 5, to become the new number 5. And it would become Roman numeral 1 through 3, and it would read, provided as outlined in 4 of this section, except in certain conditions of public assembly, such as for stadiums or arenas, the Director of Planning and Site Plan Review may approve in at least one of the following. And then you would have the language within view of an attendant or a security guard in an area that is monitored by the security camera or in an area that's visible from employee work areas. And so we didn't want to remove it completely because there really may be necessity for this. We don't want to preclude people from saying, oh gosh, we cannot provide bike parking because you know, we don't have this room in our stadium or X, Y, and Z. So this way we give ourselves the latitude, but also make it clear that our preferred options are going to be in number 4. And let's see, moving on to B, certain additional standards. In instances where more than 9 long-term bicycle parking spaces are required, a minimum of 10% of the total spaces must be dedicated as cargo, family, or adaptive bicycle parking. And number 2, adhere to the following additional standards. The spaces must be floor mounted. There must be adequate electric outlets for bicycle charging. And then number 3, a minimum dimension of 2 feet wide by 8 feet long. So we actually have an amendment to this, and we would like it to be 4 feet by 9 feet for these larger cargo spaces, because they actually do have, you know, maybe attachments to carry kids and, you know, other things. So it allows for more maneuverability. So that's that particular amendment that we are proposing. And then, let's see, we are at the end.
I have an addition to that amendment.
Oh, we want her to finish first.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and then 16705, required number of bicycle spaces, motor vehicle parking offset. For every, it says 12, but we're seeking to say 8 required bicycle parking spaces that need short or long-term bicycle standards are set forth in the table 17705. And then we actually do have 2 additional amendments that were added into the bill. And let me look and see what this one is. So this is dealing with light industrial bike parking. So on line 61 above line 4, table 16705, we would want to add in bike parking requirements for industrial light. This was never done. So it's an addition, and the requirement should mimic those for the industrial warehouse, which are long-term, 1 per 5,000 square feet of gross floor area. In short-term is the same 1 per 5,000 of gross floor area. And then the second one is bicycle parking space design, and I've referenced this before, which is the complete new table that we did not add in before. So I think with that, that's all we have for 16.
Okay, and then Councilwoman Ramos, I know you have an amendment.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Going back up to page 31, under additional standards, we also had changing from 2 feet to 2 feet by 8 feet to 4 feet to 9 feet. The other was to define adequate on the line above, and to say that there should be 1 electric outlet per charge per space, rather than adequate electric outlets, because, you know, if 1 electric outlet is completely on the other side of the room and the electric bike couldn't, you know, reach that, then, you know, we would need to make sure that there's electric outlets on each one. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll definitely consider those and have the discussion on, and this is with businesses, is that correct?
Which her amendment or?
Councilwoman Ramos, does this deal with businesses only?
This is under the section that we just talked about in terms of creating additional standards for parking spaces, bicycle parking spaces. So this is just in general. So it could be any, my understanding is that this is under the section for any.
Okay, so this would be everything.
Right.
Correct.
So what she's seeking to do in our bill on line 7 of that section, we're seeking to add, there must be adequate electric outlets for bicycle charging. And what Councilwoman Ramos is saying is to delete that and substitute it with each space must have an electric outlet. So it's just completely new language.
Okay. We'll have this.
Yes, thank you.
We'll talk about when we get to our amendments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we're just going to take maybe a 3-minute break before we get to Title IX, because that's like a number of technical things, definitions, and that would be Title 17. So just a 3-minute break, and then we'll come back and finish up the day with everything under Title 17. Thank you. Arm TV, we're back on. Thank you. Okay, we're resuming the discussion for City Council Bill 21-0113, and we're now starting Title 17 signs and definitions. And Tamara, you're back on.
Okay, so we are starting with Title 17, and I believe the First Amendment comes on page 32. And so I'm going to kind of walk you all through it. And so we're starting with we have new definitions, and this is part of kind of a companion that you'll see a little bit later. So this first proposal is to add a new definition for above ground floor. That reads, in general, above ground floor means the occupiable space in a building that is above the ground floor. Seems like it would be intuitive, but I'll explain, why. And then the second is exclusions. Above ground floor does not include anything determined to be the ground floor as defined in this section. Any exterior or interior spaces created from or defined by the structural or architectural items described in 15301 of this article, interior loft space or mezzanine space within the volume of the ground floor, or anything otherwise described in this article is not above the ground floor. And the reason for this amendment, when you look at the sign regulations, and I know we're going to get to the tables later, but when you look at the tables for things like wall signs, they actually have an allotment given to above ground floor. And we've had a few instances where those that are savvy would push the limits of what actually constitutes above ground floor, so they can get additional signage, even including things that are really not occupiable space. So we felt it was really necessary to define what ground floor and above ground floor was for those reasons, because it really does make a difference on how much signage you can do it and where you can do it. And then pretty much following from there, it's a relettering down to, let me see if I can quickly find where we pick back up. We're still relettering down into 33. Page 33 is all relettering. And we're still relettering on page 34. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything. Please stop me if I'm missing something, but I don't see anything on page 34 other than the relettering. And then we come to page 35, which is the converse ground floor definition, which is the new L. So in general, ground floor means the first level of occupiable space of a building. Exclusions, ground floor does not include anything determined to be above ground floor as defined in this section. Basement or sub-basement spaces, this is really important, or anything otherwise described in this article is not ground floor. So this becomes really interesting when you look at spaces that are built on slopes, and sometimes where maybe the first floor or the entrance is actually on the high side of the ground floor, they may actually have a basement space that is considered basement by the building code. So it seems a little intuitive, but there are reasons why we're putting this particular language in. And any questions on that before we?
None at all.
Okay, so I think we're still relettering down through page 35. And to page 36, we're relettering until we get to a new Q. This is a completely new sign that has existed sort of kind of in the 1971 code, and at the same time was included, painted signs are currently included in wall signs. So what we're proposing to do is pull them out of wall signs and make it its own sign type, which is painted mural sign. So this is a completely new definition in general. Painted mural sign means a sign applied directly to the wall of a building or other permanent structure element on a lot through paint, glue, or other medium application without the use of fasteners, frames, or other support structures. Inclusions for the purposes of this definition: a painted or mural sign lies on the same plane of the structure to which it is applied unless otherwise specified in this title. So that means just on that elevation, you're on that one elevation. A structure shall include building walls, roofs, architectural elements, fences, driveways, parking lots, or other paved areas and structure or architectural items described in this article. The reason for this particular inclusion is because the sign type actually applies to not just the building, but some people may actually opt to put a painted sign on their fence, or we've seen cases where there is a leftover structure somewhere on the site that they want to actually apply a sign. So this particular piece is letting you know that the regulation applies to those items as well.
And just to let the committee know that a lot of this we did briefly discuss in Title I, and now she's giving a little more detail. Go ahead.
As to why and what they are. So the exclusions, and this is really important from a code perspective, a painted mural sign does not include wall sign, awning or canopy sign, projecting signs, window signs, or roof signs. All of these have their own regulations with them, and so we want to make it clear that you can paint in a lot of different ways, but that does not make it a wall sign. It doesn't make a canopy sign or projecting sign. So that's the reason the definition is written the way it is. And then we are relettering on page 37. I don't see any changes other than the relettering. And on to page 38 until we get to roof sign on line 14. So line 11 is the relettering of roof sign. Line 14 is where the changes to roof sign begin. A roof sign means a sign that is erected, constructed, or maintained, or any roof surface on any permitted projection on a roof that has 30% or more of the sign face above the parapet of a building, and then we're continuing, has its principal support attached to the roof structure or behind the parapet of a building. The reason for this is sometimes we have signs in the city that look like roof signs, but because of the way they're attached, legally they've been called wall signs, and they've caused a little bit of angst. And this is something that we crafted with Katie Byrne, not in her role with BMZA, but really in her enforcement side. And really, if it looks like a roof sign, we're saying it's a roof sign, is kind of how you boil it down. So if you're 30% or more of it is above the roof, you want it to read like a roof sign. So, okay, definitionally it's a roof sign. So that's that particular one. Line 22 is we're relettering wall sign. And then we're coming back with the converse of roof sign. So now that we've further defined roof sign, let's change and qualify what wall sign is. So when we go down to line 29, we're adding in a new 4, whose sign face extends less than 30% beyond the roof line or parapet of a building. So that's the converse. You can go a little bit above and still have it called a wall sign. So that continues to page 39. And then at the top on line 4, this is where we're adding in the exclusions, saying that wall signs are not painted in mural signs. So that's clarifying the new sign type that we just talked about. Then we're continuing to reletter and renumber as necessary with these changes. And then you'll see again on lines 18 through 20, the exclusion window sign does not include a painted or mural sign. Oftentimes you will see painted windows. We're pulling that out and saying that counts as a painted mural sign. And then we're moving on to page 40.
And just want to say to the committee is she's going to continue to go through these, and just let me know if you have a question. We'll just let her proceed. Go ahead.
Okay, so we're moving on to page 40. At the top of the page, so this is about covering the windows and prohibitions related to window signs. So we're starting on line 4, where instead of saying this title, it's the article, so all of zoning code. So there might be some other regulations that we need to capture, so that are outside of Title 17. So line 5, starting with that, again, making room for the new sign type, painted mural sign, that seeks to cover any window, door, or prominent architectural feature must have design review approval. If you remember back in Title 4, when we went through that, that was one of the sign types I added in. This is the paired language with that particular one. So moving on to line 7, any painted mural sign that seeks to cover any window or portion of a window must comply with the transparency requirements described in 17.416. So this is really important when we talk about safety issues and transparency through windows. So that's where that particular one comes in. It's just cross-referencing that you still have to comply. So 17.206, this is the meat of the changes. This is completely new section. And I'll just start off, before we walk through all of this, I'll start off with why we are doing or proposing to do this new section. As you may remember, we rewrote Title 17 in 2018, and now we've had a few years under our belt to see what's working, what's not working. And what we've heard is a couple of things, that the sign regs are cumbersome for things like shopping centers that have more than one building on their lot. How do you split? How do you do all of these different things? The other thing that we've heard continuously and had a lot of conversations with the law department on is whether or not to allow BMZA to vary your quantity of signage. We've gotten a lot of pushback that, people could go to BMZA and ask for an unlimited number of signs on a building just depending on their proposal. We've said no. We're standing by that. We've had conversations with the law department, with Hillary Ruley, that also has said, no, we don't have the ability to do that, that we are creating the rule, so you're not having a hardship against the rule that we created. We picked the number. So we've had a lot of conversations, so we've heard that. The other piece that was kind of piled into this section are things like drive-throughs, where you can't even begin to quantify how many signs a drive-through might need. They're all different. But because of the way that we've had to write this particular title, we couldn't write, the reason for Title 18 changes, for Title 17 changes in 2018 was we had to remove sign types by content. So no more building identification, no more, any of those things. Is the straight type. Is it a wall sign? Is it a projecting sign? Is it a roof sign? So when you get to things like drive-throughs and wayfinding, that's like 5 billion little baby freestanding signs. So how do you work around that without saying you need, wayfinding? Because we can't say wayfinding. So hence this special rule section that we've drafted. And I'll walk you through kind of the different conditions and why. So Special Rule 17.206, the first part is a more than one principal building on a lot. So you have a large lot, you have several different buildings. It could be a campus, it could be, any number of things. Except for roof signs, Any lot with more than one principal building on that lot may have signage on each building that complies with the rules and regulations of the respective sign type in Table 17201, sign regulations in Table 17306, maximum cumulative areas of signs. All that's saying is each of your buildings can have some signs as is outlined in the sign table. So that's the first one. Number 2, unless otherwise provided in this title, the aggregate maximum area of signage allowed for each building may not be combined or split. So the reason for this is once we allow you to have signage on each of your buildings, you can't go back and do the math, say, oh, well, that means we get, 5 million square feet of this type of sign, so I'm going to pile it on this one building. No, it's you get it for each of these buildings within. So that's what the first one is. That's what A is. B, freestanding monument signs. Freestanding monument signs may be installed on lots adjacent to and contiguous with residential developments of 20 units or more if the units are in a single building or part of a major subdivision or redevelopment of contiguous and adjoining lots. So what this is we have a lot of developers that are doing like townhouse developments, and they want to name their development after whatever, and they want an entrance sign. Well, often those entrance signs are on like an HOA lot or something like that. It's not sold to a particular property owner. So how do you allow for that? This is the clause that we're proposing that would allow for them to do that as part of the development, even though we know in the future it won't be owned by any one particular private property owner. It will be, owned probably by the HOA and, any other scenario. So, but what we're doing is saying it's starting at 20 units or more. So if for some reason, you have a single family home that comes for a conversion to 3 units, you're now multifamily technically. We don't want you to put a sign in front of your row house conversion. So we're starting at what we deem to be a good size multifamily building, which is 20 units. So C is sign splitting of aggregate maximum sign area. So this is where you can start doing the math. The aggregate maximum sign area per sign type as calculated under 17306 of this title may be split into multiple signs and dispersed on a single lot for the following sign types in zoning districts and uses. So the first one, freestanding monument signs and freestanding pylon signs for approved drive-through facilities in C2, C3, C4, and C5 zoning districts. So this is where most of our drive-throughs live. We're fine with them, being there and understand they need signage. So whatever that, amount is that you have, split it into your menu boards and your, arrow signs and all these other things that you might need. The second one, freestanding monument signs and freestanding pylon signs for uses in C2, C3, and C4 and C5 zoning districts where the lot is 10,000 square feet or greater or has more than one principal building on a lot. This is getting at your shopping centers, your larger planned unit developments that really, they're sizable. And they really may decide to have a different kind of signage plan. So we're making allowances for those, for the monument signs and pylon signs, where quite honestly, they might be really large in some cases to the entrance to that development. Freestanding monument signs, and looking at number 3, freestanding monument signs, freestanding pylon signs, and wall signs where there is more than one principal building on a lot in the EC1, EC2, open space hospital, OIC, which is your office industrial, and BSC zoning districts. This option must be documented in a signage package. So these really and truly are our parks that need wayfinding, our hospitals, our schools, your office industrial parks, they literally need wayfinding. So this is to give them that latitude that they need. Number 4, so I'm on page 41 now. Number 4, wall signs above ground floor in the C3, C4, C5 TOD, BSC, H, which is hospital, I-1, I-2, and PC zoning districts. So this is getting at why I was saying we need the definition for above ground floor. Because now we're starting to talk about how you can split your allotment for above ground floor, which is typically a factor of your linear footage. So you might be in the hundreds and possibly 1,000 square feet of wall signage that would be allowed once you start looking at above ground floor. These particular zoning districts are where we see our larger buildings. And so we know that they need some latitude on where they can place it. This particular clause lives in a form already in Title 17, so it's really removing it and changing it a little bit. Number 5, the maximum area of signage cannot be varied to create more sign area and then split into multiple signs, nor can a sign that results from the split be later replaced with a larger sign. This is really, important. You can't go to the board, say, I need more signage, and then go split it amongst yourself. So really, this is what you have, then let's play with what you have. Now, that's the first piece, and then we come, and that's just across the board. So then we come to D, so the automatic increase in total maximum area. So here is where we're going to allow you to you don't have to go to the board, we're proposing anyway, if sign splitting is used, a 15% automatic total maximum area increase may be applied to the aggregate base and permitted before the sign splitting is used, subject to the following. The maximum sign area automatically increase on this subsection may not be further increased by the BMZA. So we're going to give you 15%. Don't ask for 15% and then go back for more and more and more. All signs under this subsection must be permitted at the same time on the same permit and increase documented on the permit. And so we definitely understand and want to work with our larger developments, but we're not trying to really hurt neighborhoods that may be next door to them or something like that. So we're giving the latitude, but saying only in these conditions.
This is kind of helping to control our downtown area, would you say?
A little bit. Okay. It will help a little bit, and it will give some of the latitude, as we know there's some larger tenants moving in and out of downtown that have large signs at the very top. So it is going to help with that piece. And so on page 41, now we're looking at E, and this is only pertaining to wall signs. So single-story, single-tenant buildings that are 15,000 square feet or greater in C2 through C5 in the PC zoning districts may use the above ground floor signage allotment for wall signs in Table 17-201. So the reason for this, as I mentioned before, in the table, when you see above ground floor allotments, they're much larger than ground floor. And on occasion, it's pretty rare, but we do have cases in the city in these particular categories where we do actually have single-story, single-tenant buildings. It's rare, but we want to make allowances for them to be able to have signage in proportion to the size of their building. So the second piece, ground floor tenants 15,000 square feet or greater in a multi-tenant building with direct street access in C2 through C5 and PC zoning districts may use the above ground floor signage allotment for wall signs, subject to the following. So applicable only to the uses outlined in the commercial and institutional use categories. So this is, for instance, if you are, have a multi-family building that's coming in, and maybe it has room for 4 tenant spaces. 3 of them are your regular small ones, just your coffee shops or whatever. They can come in, do what they need to do per the signage table. Where we run into an issue is if we have a larger, say, grocery store tenant that comes in on the ground floor. They're going to be 15,000 square feet or larger. right now, we don't allow signage for that ground floor use. So what we're saying is just dip into that larger allotment for above ground floor. This is following the reasoning why we had to define above ground floor, why we're doing these things, because this is the control. We don't want your coffee shop to be able to have a 100 square foot sign. But we do want the grocery store possibly to have that. So that's where number 2 is coming in. And so for the application of this title, table 17201 and 17306, for buildings whose main entrance does not front a right-of-way, not including an unnamed alley or named alley, the building frontage is designated as the elevation that has the main entrance to the building or the tenant. This is really important for shopping centers, that the tenants sometimes drive aisles, in a parking lot. They're not actually on a street. So we were trying to play test different conditions that we know are being developed. The building frontage or tenant frontage must be 40 feet wide or greater. So again, this is aiming at those larger ground floor tenants, anchor tenants that we need in the city. So going to page 42, this is all about planned unit developments. Right now, with planned unit developments, there's a lot of gray area on how you treat signage in our PUDs, often because our PUDs date back to the 1960s. I think Cross Keys is probably one of the earliest ones, maybe like late 60s, early 70s. All of them don't speak to signage. Some speak to signage. So we get lots of questions. How do you deal with this? The other piece that we have in play are the areas of special signage control, which, Madam Chair, I think you were alluding to when you talked about helping our signage downtown. So this entire new section that we're proposing gets to that. So F, planned unit developments. The following rules apply for signage within PUDs. Unless otherwise specified in an individual planned unit development ordinance, all existing planned unit developments established or have had a major change after June 5th, 2017 must follow the rules specified in this title. So that's basically saying if you have an old PUD that doesn't speak to signage, look at the new code. So that's all that says.
So Tamara, if it's okay with the committee, we are definitely very familiar with PUDs on the council, so you can kind of fast forward.
Okay.
If there's any questions from the committee about PUDs, I'm sure we are very versed with PUDs, so you can kind of skip over that.
Okay, sure. And so we're moving to page 43 and looking at sign area general 17302. So the painted and mural signs, again, this is a new sign type, so we have to put all of these different things in that weren't there. So what exactly is that? A painted mural sign is a single design in the same plane or elevation shall be considered one sign. Often, artists might actually turn the corner on their sign. So that's letting you know how it would be counted as one or two signs, in this case, one sign. For painted mural signs that include both signage and art in a single design, the signage shall be calculated as the combined area of the signage portion, so we're not regulating art. That's a big question we get all the time. We are not trying to regulate art, only if it's defined as a sign. So that may be text, it may be a logo. The next piece on page 44, building and tenant frontage measurement methodology. As you heard, we are, with the above ground floor, we're talking about tenant frontage. That's something totally new to the code, but is only pertaining to signage. So we're saying, what is that? For any building subject to this title, the building frontage shall be identified and calculated based on the building elevation that is parallel and immediately adjacent to the right-of-way, excluding unnamed or named alleys, or the parking lot drive aisle, which I mentioned before, on which the main entrance fronts. So this could be like a strip mall center or something that, is leasing out tenant spaces. For ground floor tenants with direct street access, tenant frontage shall be calculated per linear foot of the exterior facing frontage for that tenant. So you're build your, leasable spaces from X to Y. So we just measure that. 17309, maximum area and maximum quantity. So except as provided in subsection and otherwise provided in this article, the maximum area per sign specified in 17201 is the maximum area allowed. So again, these are things that you think would be intuitive, but we actually got a lot of questions. So we said, let's define them. The maximum quantity is the total number of signs per sign type allowed in the table. The aggregate maximum sign area is calculated by multiplying the maximum area per sign by the maximum quantity. So that's just letting people know how we do the math. Exception. In general, any sign that is required by city, building, fire, and related codes that is 2 square feet or less does not count towards your maximum quantity or the maximum area per sign specified in 17201 or your max cumulative area. So that's just giving you a free something. So if, you got to have your occupancy and all that stuff listed per fire code or building code, then you need to do it. Signs over 2 square feet. This one is important. Any signs over 2 square feet or any sign described in paragraph 1 of this subsection is subject to the rules and regs. So often, one of the cool things to do is a new multifamily wants to have their name be their actual address, and the numbers might actually be 100 square feet. Well, you don't need that for fire code. That's actually your choice at that point. So we're giving you the first 2 square feet to deal with what you need to do. And then anything over that is counting towards the regulation. So requirements by sign type. I'm willing to go. How long do you want? You want me to keep going, or how do you? Okay.
Yeah, we're trying to get through 17.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
a lot of this we are definitely familiar with, so you can just do little quick segments. Are there any, on the rest of 17, are there any amendments?
Yes.
Okay.
So there, besides what's in the bill, or
Any
yes.
amendments that we need to be aware of to add to our list for the amendment discussion?
No, that the only ones, those are the ones that I believe we might have some that are coming from Councilman Costello.
Okay,
But
right.
we have to double check
Gotcha.
on those.
In the rest of 17, is there anything that we really need to, that you really need to bring out as awareness for us?
Sure. So I can just run through. So 17404F, and on page 47, 17407, under G, architecture, into, so this is a kind of a twin amendment that speaks to allowing, we have a lot of old historic theaters in the city that are being revitalized that have old marquees and canopies. So this particular set of amendments would help them to be able to make them digital and bring them up to today's standards. So I do know that there are definitely some that are waiting in the wings for this particular set. So it's, and when you start looking at CHAP regulations, they call them marquees. We don't call them marquees in the zoning code. They're awning and canopy signs. So that's why you see the language under awning and canopy, and then allowing for any electronic signage subject to the rules and regs. And then that's where you see on page 47 the language about the local historic districts and landmarks. So that's tying it to that. And in the electronic signs, so I'm going to go back to page 46 just really quickly. This is new. So remember way back at the beginning where we said we were going to add the smaller electronic signs as conditional to board to the residential areas, right, in the institutional uses. So that could be religious institutions, et cetera. That's this language here. Okay. So that's the companion to what we talked about in the beginning. So it's in a residential use category only for multifamily dwellings with 50 or more units, and in all other use categories. How this appears in the table, and we'll go through the table, I know another time, is it'll be CB, conditional to board. So let's see. I don't see a lot of other changes. So we are adding on page 48 the standards for painted and mural signs. So that's 5 through 11. This is important because this is telling you where you can do a painted and mural sign, R1A through R10. Uses in the institutional open space and allowed in other use categories, but they have to be listed on the table. So you'll see where on the table you can do it. Projecting signs is just, again, in other zoning districts as specified in this title. Same language that's coming in for roof signs. And wall signs is just the renumbering, and again, that language in the zoning district specified in the title, so that's just clarifying where you find them. And a few deletions: must be placed on the side of the building unless otherwise provided in this title. That's just clarifying for where wall signs needs to be. And window signs, again, just a few deletions. And then on page 50, again, just where you find them, table 17-201. And then on page 50, the areas of special signage control. And this is the designation of signage plan approval for planned unit developments. So if you remember in the section that I added earlier about PUDs, I talked about there would be language of how they interface with areas of special signage control. So in that section, we wrote language that says you can do an ASSC with a PUD and how that would happen. This is the mirrored, kind of twin language in title, in section 5. And so in subtitle 5, so that talks about the designation sign plan approval as it relates to PUDs. In general, they may be incorporated into new PUDs and by established ordinance, and then it outlines the standards of how you have to do it. So basically what it's saying is you have to treat it like an ASSC and meet those standards. And the reason being is, for some reason, if in the future someone wants to get rid of the PUD section, the ASSC can still stand alone. So that's the gist of Title 17.
Thank you, and thank you for your detailed presentation, really, with Title 15 through 17 today. And before we go to recess, I want to thank the agencies that have been with us through this whole thing today. And we know that Jeff is on for the City Solicitor's Office, and we have Stephanie Murdoch that has been representing the Department of Housing and Community Development, and we have Liam Davis that has been consistently with us from the Department of Transportation, and we have had Louise Cardona that has been with us today from the Baltimore Development Corporation, and Francis Berzinski, did I say your name right? Okay, that has been with us from the Parking Authority. And for the committee, you can continue to review Titles 15 through 17, so when we come back, if there's anything that we might have missed, we still have time to add that. And then we're going to go into recess. And I do want to also, we've had Adam Adair with us all day today too, with the Mayor's Legislative Office as well. And I think I did mention you, Sophia, with the legislative team, with the mayor as well. And I want to thank you all for sticking with us and as we work through this. And we're now in recess until our next meeting. And everyone, please continue to enjoy your summer in Baltimore. We're in recess.